Awesome. Well, let's get started. My name is Kumar Garg. I'm Vice President of Schmidt Futures, and I wanted to welcome you to the Data Science for Everyone Commitments Event of 2022. I have here with me Steve Levitt, who is the founder of the Data Science for Everyone Coalition, famed author of Freakonomics, and I'm like an avid listener of his new podcast. So I feel like I'm just going to get to hearing Steve's voice is like a welcome reminder. And he's obviously, a distinguished professor of economics at University of Chicago. But I think the reason we have Steve here is like the real passion that he's devoted to expanding data science as an area that all children can thrive in. So I'm going to welcome Steve to give a few remarks. But before we do that, we've got a huge set of people here, and it's really exciting. So I just want to do. We're many years into this pandemic, so a lot of people have heard this drill before, but we'll just quickly run through them. So the first is, not everyone is able to join this event, but we found that these recordings are incredibly useful for others. So this event is being recorded. The second is that, we are really excited about getting your ideas. We actually read through the chats quite extensively. So I'd welcome everybody to introduce themselves in the chat, give your name, your organization, anything that you're doing on data science, any of your ideas for things that you'd love to tell people about or questions. And we should, we'll have that as a running feature in the chat. And then third, where this is an announcement event, we're going to be rolling out a number of announcements that the community has actually made over the past year on expanding data science. So if folks hear something exciting or have announcements, we're going to have a common hashtag that everyone is using, DS, and then the number 4, everyone, for if you're doing anything on social. And then there's a Twitter handle, DS, and this time FOR, everyone, that's on Twitter. And, if any of the work here gets you excited and you're interested in making a commitment or stepping up to do more in this area, feel free to both drop in your interest into the chat, and we'd love to follow up with you. So with that, let me pass it to Steve to give us some opening thoughts on both his motivation and why we're here.
Oh, great. Thank you, Kumar. Welcome, everyone. The Data Science for Everyone Coalition has grown to more than 1,200 people, spanning education, industry, policy, and philanthropy. It's really turned into an amazing organization. We're already seeing impacts. There's more data science courses being offered. Data science is being integrated into K-12 standards, frameworks, and teacher training. On the federal level, we've got 10 U.S. senators who've urged the IES and the NSF to support K-12 data science education. They called for $60 million in incremental funding. These are small wins, but nothing like what we have in mind for the future. We plan to vastly intensify our efforts via this coalition over the next years. We have no time to waste, and with a coalition like this, as remarkable as ours, there's just no excuses for not making more progress than we're making. As hard as it is, as many obstacles as are there. So today we'll hear from commitment makers and data science education leaders on what we've learned, what's been going on at the local, the state, the federal level, and what's missing, what the obstacles are that are blocking our progress. Okay, but let me get out of the way and introduce our keynote speaker today. She's Dominique Duval-Diop. She's Deputy Chief Data Scientist of the United States from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She's been described as a data scientist, economic geographer, artist, mother, and dreamer. And what a combo that is. That really says it all. So take it away, Dominique. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. And thanks, everyone. It's really a pleasure for me to help kick off today's Data Science for Everyone event. I want to start by talking about my journey to becoming the Deputy Chief Data Scientist of the United States. Steve mentioned my other identities and hats, so that's just not that's just one facet of who I am as a person. But my journey was really a winding road. Unlike many who enter the field of data science today, I wasn't trained in coding or algorithms or any of the myriad other technologies that many would say define what a real data scientist should know. I entered this field with a curiosity about numbers and the patterns that they can reveal. A tendency to question, had a little conversation with with Steve a little bit earlier, questioning economics, and a love of puzzles and maps, a sense of justice and a passionate desire to acquire the power to address the wrongs I observed or lived through, the wrongs of systemic racism. So growing up in Chicago's South Side, I noticed the economic and social barriers that limited the futures of many of my peers. That nurtured my interest in the study of economics at Northwestern University. But as I completed my training in economics and later taught in elementary schools in Louisiana, I realized that what I was learning didn't provide me enough insight on why certain schools, why certain neighborhoods and families were so stuck in poverty. So I needed to understand the nexus of economics, geography, and the power of place. I was in South Louisiana during Katrina, getting my doctorate in economic geography, and later working in state government on hurricane recovery and rebuilding. Seeing the disparities that were being embedded in the design of the homeowner rebuilding program further inspired me to finish my degree. This is in spite of me giving birth to my third child at the time. So when I finished my degree, I became the first African-American woman to get a PhD in geography at Louisiana State University. When I moved on from state government, I negotiated access to the data on that homeowner rebuilding program and conducted a geospatial analysis that showed that Black and low-income rural homeowners were getting less support simply because they had lower valued homes, in spite of the high cost of rebuilding. That analysis caused a program change that unlocked over $2 billion in additional resources for low-income homeowners. Now, that experience really showed me that I had a superpower, using data for good. And when I later joined federal government, that's when I was able to take advantage of training opportunities and add formal data science techniques and tools to my skill set. So data literacy, data skills, and data orientation are some of the most fundamental components of what young people need to not only compete in today's workforce or to make informed choices about their own health and safety. It's what they need to change the world. And when you put data to work in service of the American people, you can truly move the needle on equity and change how the institution of government meets the needs of all communities, especially those that require it the most. In the federal government, we address diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility goals for data science in two ways. One, by actively recruiting and retaining diverse talent to work on data across federal agencies. And two, by upskilling the existing federal workforce, which is often itself already very diverse. As I mentioned before, this was how I achieved a skill set that, combined with my other expertise and experience, brought me to my current position. But possibly the most important thing that we can do to diversify our data workforce is to make sure that the work we're doing feels relevant to the people we are trying to attract into federal service. So as you heard me say, that was my driving motivation to do good work, important work that addresses inequity. People of color, LGBTQ people, those who are from low-income communities or with disabilities will be drawn to public service and data positions if the public we are serving includes them. Clearly, fundamentally, there's a pipeline issue that needs to be addressed. This is why Data Science for Everyone's efforts to uplift the work of groups, such as the Young Data Scientists League, is so important in inspiring young people to understand how data and data science can become their superpower for addressing the world's most intractable problems. If we make K-12 education in data science, AI, and other emerging technologies widely accessible to students, especially students of color, we can start laying the foundation for the diversity and representation we need in federal service, and use data science to design public programs and policies that narrow the wealth gap over the next 20 to 30 years. So I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about this pipeline issue today. What I want to focus on for the next few minutes is how do we as the federal government harness data, advanced analytic techniques, and an orientation towards data-driven decision-making to attract a diverse team of creative problem solvers. Well, there's two ways. First, we can aim to collect data that reflects the diversity within and among communities. We can develop an instinct to continually zoom in on the data to see the underlying patterns, break things down by geography, race and ethnicity, income, sexual orientation, gender identity, primary language, etc. And second, we can use that data and insights that come from analysis to drive action, narrowing disparities and addressing problems that communities have faced for generations. So in practice, what does this look like? This is important work, so important that on his first day in office, President Biden signed an executive order on advancing racial equity that specifically called for the creation of something called the Equitable Data Working Group. That working group released recommendations this spring, and the fundamental finding was that if we want to understand the different ways our communities experience disparity, we need to collect data that can be sliced and diced in different ways to reveal those details. In most contexts where we ask for information on race and ethnicity, the categories are so broad that they can mask the very identity that matters for what we're trying to measure. So as an example, a young Hmong student from St. Paul, Minnesota might want to apply for a fellowship program that helps young data scientists from underrepresented communities get their first job in federal government. The program application, however, only lets applicants select among 5 broad categories to describe their race or ethnicity. So the Hmong student checks Asian American and then receives a notice weeks later that Asian Americans are not underrepresented in federal data service, despite the fact that Hmong people are much less likely to go to college and much more likely to live in poverty than the general population. So how we collect data, how we use data to interrogate the intersections of inequity, and how we publish that data, making it available to the public, can have a huge impact on whether people get access to opportunities or not. Data collection matters, but it also matters how you put that data to work. That's why it's so important to infuse equitable data into the core work that we do as a government, whether it's rolling out the bipartisan infrastructure law or improving the experience for disaster survivors getting assistance from federal government. Doing equitable data means developing the muscles for turning data into action, using evidence to change federal policy and programming, none of which would be nearly as effective without the insights and leadership of a diverse team of data scientists and data policy staff. That's why we're counting on you, all of you in this virtual room that we have here, to make sure that we have a diverse and inquisitive next generation of data-minded young people ready to pick up this work. Across federal government, we're making space for that next generation to thrive. We have something called the US Digital Corps that brings early career data scientists and technologists from diverse backgrounds into federal government for 2-year stints where they can apply data science solutions to issues of national priority. And people already working for the federal government can take advantage of programs like the data science upskilling programs. Our goal is to make sure that the growing number of government data science jobs brings in diverse candidates that are committed to principles of equity. Our opportunity today is to make sure that historically disadvantaged students are not left behind once again as these opportunities grow. We need to make sure that the right pathway, indeed multiple pathways, are created, especially for those who lack resources or community supports. We need to be intentional as we work to build data literacy and increase the data science pipeline so that we can break down systemic barriers rather than inadvertently reinforcing them. I stumbled into the field of data science nearly 20 years ago, and I'm grateful for the work that you all are doing to make a clearer path than the one I followed for young people to chart a career in data science. By investing in programs that expand the pathways available to underserved and under-resourced young people, we can disrupt the cycle of inequity and make it easier for people like me to gain and use the superpower of data science, and together use data to bring about a more equitable present and future. So I'm so excited to be a part of this event today. I think it's very important, it's exciting work, and it's critically needed. And thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I think that was incredible, tying together both the priorities of the administration, but also what are ways that, if we don't invest in the pipeline, none of this work can be possible. So I and I know how busy you are from having done these jobs. So we are super appreciative that you're able to join us and that you might be able to stick around for some of the conversations that follow. I think you teed us up really well for the panel that will follow right after. And the key theme of the panel is really going to be focused on if we, data science is something that is rapidly taking over workplaces, the university sector. How do we take what is happening on this, as we just heard the federal government as well, and bring it into a K-12 context and sort of bring those competencies in others? And we've got some amazing leaders from a number of different sectors, from philanthropy to business to government, joining us. So let me invite our panelists onto our virtual stage. Awesome. Great. Awesome. And let me pass to Josh Elder.
Thanks, Kumar. Hi, everyone. Great to see old friends, new friends, and others that are just excited to have a conversation and talk about why data science is so important. Really appreciative of this opportunity to be a part of this panel with my fellow colleagues here to kind of talk about thinking about what the pipeline for data science literacy looks like as we connect it to industry. I have a few questions that I'll ask after we do introductions, but definitely encourage people to throw questions into the chat. We'll try to incorporate them as much as possible or get to them at the end with a Q&A, or might do some additional follow-up at the end. So please feel free to utilize the chat feature and send questions through. But I'll kick us off for introductions, and then we'll get started with the conversations with everyone. But Joshua Elder, I'm Director and Head of Grant Making at Siegel Family Endowment. We are based here in New York City, but have a national focus in terms of our mission of understanding and shaping the impact of technology on society, specifically within the learning space, workforce, and infrastructure. And with our learning work, we primarily have been supporting programs and solutions that are really focused on building lifelong learning opportunities, particularly in the computer science space and data science space, and really envision an education system that works for everyone by addressing longstanding social and economic inequities. We are proud supporters of Data Science for Everyone, and so really excited for the Commitments event today and just to really meet more people that are passionate about this work. And so I will pass it over to Lydia.
Hi, I am Lydia Logan. I'm the Vice President for Global Education and Workforce Development in Corporate Social Responsibility. Running out of breath saying my title at IBM. And in my role, I'm responsible for all of our education and workforce programs that we run globally that we do for social good. So that includes what we do for high schools at the university level. We also work with faculty and with job seekers. We focus on underrepresented minorities, women, veterans. More recently, we've been focused on refugees, the neurodivergent community, and those have been traditionally left out of the tech sector. We focus on using our technology and our talent to provide opportunities for people in our priority populations. And we do that through partnerships and the programs that we run. I can talk a little bit more about that later, but I don't want to take up too much time about me. I'd like to get on with our panel. Thank you for having me.
Brandeis, you want to go next?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Brandeis Marshall, CEO of DataedX Group. And we are a startup that is very much focused on continuing education for data educators, practitioners, and scholars, really focusing on that professional development and how you understand making really good, responsible connections. So we're very focused on data equity. What does that mean for all historically excluded groups? And in particularly, we focus on Black women. So happy to be here, and let's get on with this panel.
And Anthony.
Thanks, Josh. Anthony Owen, State Director of Computer Science for the state of Arkansas, role I've been honored to serve in since 2015. And we'll serve in until July 25th of this year. At that point, I will be transitioning over as a Senior Director of Government Affairs for Code.org, but we in Arkansas are 100% in on data science. In fact, in 2020, when we rewrote our computer science standards, me being a past mathematician, had a high interest in bringing data science to Arkansas. Nobody else seemed to, so we wrote a 3-year pathway, high school pathway dedicated to data science or focused on data science, brought industry in, and we're starting to see growth in that program of study. So just happy to be here and happy to hear questions and maybe learn something.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. And really appreciative for Dr. Duval-Diop's opening remarks as well. I mean, I guess one question to start us off with, and we talked a little bit about this when we were kind of prepping for this conversation, and knowing that this panel is specifically thinking about the pipeline and connection to industry needs, but knowing that this is bigger than just the industry and workforce issue, that this is something that everyone should be informed about and care about. And so I wanted to open, Brandeis and Lydia, I know you both had some thoughts around why this is so important before we even talk about the industry piece, but wanted to welcome you to give any kind of like framing or the context why you all are so passionate about this.
Sure, I'm happy to start. I think, if you think about what it takes to stay competitive in any environment, globally competitive, competitive in research, competitive to find the best answers to the most challenging solutions, you need a diverse group of people at the table. And so from our perspective at IBM, we want to make sure we have a diverse workforce focusing on our innovations. So that's why we're looking at providing our programs broadly and looking at providing access to people who've been left out of technology. And that includes exposure for students in high school to data science, to careers in technology. How do we make sure that we have a pipeline of people who are exposed early, who get the skills that they need, whether they choose a degree path or not? But if we don't have diverse ideas, diverse people around the table when we're really tackling these big challenges, we're not going to have the best answers at the end of the day. So, yes, it's great opportunity for individuals, it's great for business, but it's also great for society.
And then just to piggyback off of Lydia, I really see what we're trying to do is understand data citizenship, because data is a currency that we need to all understand, from those who teach the children to the children themselves. And so that's why my focus is really on the educators and scholars and practitioners, because they're the ones that need to digest the information and then retool it for an audience of K through 12. And what does that mean and how does that look like? So the why for me is we are now entering in, or we have entered into an environment where understanding data is necessary. It's a life skill at this point. If you don't understand how your personal data is being used, you can't guard against being scammed. So this is important for all of us. And we need to make sure that there is a platform and pathways for those who are in the next generation to understand how they can see themselves in this data society that we are now in. So that's just a couple of my thoughts on why, and really trying to make sure people understand.
I know you can.
Anthony, any thoughts or framing on the why for you before we start talking about what does this actually look like in the K-12 environment?
Well, I mean, I would just add in, and I think that the two speakers before me, hit on this, is that a big reason for us to include data science in all of our pathways. I mentioned that we had a high school pathway dedicated to data science, but we really have data literacy K through all of our high school courses. And what we focused on large in part, especially those K grades, was a better understanding and a societal understanding of storytelling with data. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a mathematician, and I was always taught their statistics, there are lies, darn lies, and then there are statistics. And in this day and age, it's very important for people to understand that while data is data in its raw form, any person can take that data and tell the story they want it to tell by manipulation or cherry picking points out of that data. And it's becoming increasingly important for all of society to know that. And it's part of what we consider to be a well-rounded student, graduating from a K-12 institution.
Awesome, thank you. So I think picking up on that like currency analogy and thinking about how do I make sure that this currency that I am developing and utilizing in the K-12 space is going to be a currency that's relevant at IBM or it's relevant at another organization. And so would love to think about what are your thoughts about how do we make sure what's happening in the K-12 environment as it pertains to data science is actually connected to what we're hearing from industry in terms of their needs and the skill sets that are going to make them successful in the industries that they are working in. So I'll open it for that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we have heard that data scientist is now the highest paying job for someone with a bachelor's degree, and that it's projected to grow to $138.9 billion market in 2020 to $229.4 billion by 2025. So it's obviously a growth area, something, right? We're encouraging students to look at their future and where the opportunity is. We've heard, right, data science is everywhere. It's how do you understand the data? How do you tell stories with it? How do you understand the stories that are being told to you? And how do you apply that in a work setting? And I think, that is something that is a foundational skill. We offer free training in it at multiple levels through Skills Build, through the work we do with universities, through work we do with, faculty. It doesn't have to come from us. I think one way that students can signify that is to go earn a badge in it, to explore it, to figure out what this looks like. In younger grades, it's about curiosity with data. And then as you get older, it's about how do you apply it? How do you start to manipulate data sets? What does this look like for you? And I think that's where we need to start thinking about, where do you end up? What sort of jobs does this lead to? But also, how do we start hooking students early? And what kind of activities, are age appropriate that make the most sense? I'm not going to pretend to be a standards expert, but I think making sure that the standards and the kinds of activities that we have students doing and are exposed to are getting them at the right age and stage for their development is going to be crucial in making this work.
And I just wanted to talk a little bit about like how to make this tangible and actionable for all you educators out there. So one of the things that I think is super important is to take what's happening in the news, not the bad stuff. I know there's a lot of bad stuff, but there are, scroll down from the top line, and there are certain situations, certain circumstances that are happening in our world, not just in the United States, but in our world, that is great information, as well as sharing different data points that could be very relevant. It could be a visualization that you might want to integrate into a curriculum in the next few weeks of your class. There might be an opportunity to have a discussion about a certain concept, especially as the students are older and in high school. They can talk through some of the tensions between what is data truth versus what are alternative facts. And I think this is great source of information that's already available to you for free. I like free 99, especially for educators. And it provides a way in order to help the next generation understand how our world works. How does policy work? How does government work? And it's just a pathway in order to start to fold in what is a data set? how do you actually manipulate a data set? And you provide that type of motivation and significance to why you might need to learn how to script or how to code, or might need to learn what is a dashboard and how does it actually work, and how to digest information once it's revealed to you. Is it an insight or is it something that you throw away? These are all questions, depending on the age group, that you as an educator can actually help yourself and those whom you teach understand. And then the second point I want to make is for the young kids. It's something that my mother did when I was little, and that was rolling coins. So I'm not sure if that's something that is done today, but if it is a very good idea in order to get a little kid to understand a little bit about money, understand a little bit about counting, but also to really start to think about data as a currency, and not just money, but also what you can do with that currency. And it's a broader conversation that you can scaffold.
And Josh, I'll just jump in here from a very practical governmental standpoint. I think that one thing in Arkansas, we had included data science within our computer science standards since 2016, but we were once again, like I said, I came from a math background. So we were very heavy on the data mining, the statistical analysis pieces. We got into some of the data warehousing, data visualization, database, things of those nature. What we failed, and we did not realize that we failed in 2016 to do until we rewrote our standards in 2020, we brought in the Arkansas Center for Data Sciences. We brought in the Chief Data Officer for Arkansas. We brought in Marie Dillards from Dillards Corporation, who is one of their lead data scientists and has a PhD in data science. We brought in Carl Schubert from U of A, who built their data science program at our flagship university. And what we realized that while we were looking at the very technical aspects and doing a relatively good job of including those in our standards for computer science and computing, we had neglected that really that storytelling side that I mentioned before, the true understanding and the what the data meant. We had students doing the manipulation and all that, but did they really understand how they were presenting the stories? Were they doing it in a way that was, we've talked about ethics in this panel before and ethical representation. Were they doing it in a way that was ethical, or were they doing it in a way that just threw out raw data for any, for whatever purpose, or that were they including biases in it? So that was one thing that we learned from bringing in those industry experts into our state standards writing process and having them an integral part of that. And that was where I was going with that statement. Was the first thing the states need to do is, when they start writing these standards, is ensure that you have the people that are in the field in the room with you as you're writing the academic standards. Because if you're just writing them from an academic or academia standpoint, they're going to be very theoretical based, and they're not going to be representative of what your corporations are looking for. And Lydia and Brandeis can feel free to disagree with me if they want, but from a government standpoint, we saw that as very instrumental. And then once we found those high level concepts that we wanted, we started backing those down age appropriately to kindergarten level and ensuring that we were scaffolding that appropriately across their educational system.
Perfect. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you for those people putting in questions in the chat and the conversations. I'm also trying to keep up with them as well. But one question that I think is relevant to that, as you were describing, Anthony, there was a question around thinking about the conversations and kind of the framework that Brandeis had laid out, thinking about just the importance of data and being data literate and that currency piece. And then looking at data literacy versus data science literacy, and wanting to understand and unpack, like, what are some of those core competencies or things that are needed on the data science literacy for teachers and students to be competent. And so I was wondering if anyone had any thoughts kind of around that dialogue and the difference and similarities within that.
Well, I guess I will start on this one. I think that one of the differences between, for me, one of the differences for me comparing data literacy with data science literacy is really data cleanup. When you are thinking about data literacy, you're thinking about how you might use data, right? But when you're thinking about data science literacy, you're thinking about how will you as an individual be hands-on in the data. And that typically starts not only with asking the right questions and forming the right problem and understanding what path solution you want to make, but it really is how are you working with the data directly. And working with the data directly does tend to mean you're spending a lot of time cleaning it up. Whereas the literacy piece, you might not spend that much time cleaning it up. Data literacy is trying to understand just how do we ingest that information. So foundationally, data literacy is all about how do you play in society with your data? And how do we navigate that environment? How does that translate to jobs? Because not every person is going to be a data scientist, but every position is going to have a data role. And so understanding that difference is important. Not everyone's going to be able to clean up data, analyze data, code and script, and create dashboards. But we need to make sure that everyone understands that they have a role in the data lineage and in the data lifecycle. So foundationally, the K through 12 and the younger baby space is understanding that they see data all the time, the media, et cetera. But then as they get older, they can now understand how they can be contributors to the data space. And they can be part of that data, science literacy.
And Josh, I'll just jump in here from our standpoint and how we kind of took it in Arkansas as we scaffolded it up. We thought about it much in the same way that Brandeis was speaking to there. At the earlier levels, we did look at some statistical analysis of very simple data sets, hair color, height, things of those nature of classmates, rolling the coin, so to speak. But much of it is starting to understand that visualization and how those statistics relate to that. You're not going to get into those other areas of data science until those upper levels of, of database and processing, data mining, machine learning. I saw someone put natural language processing in the chat a while ago. You're not going to get into those aspects until you're really the upper end. And also it depends on the focus of what the student is wanting to go into. I kind of analogize it to, and it's simpler to see maybe with cybersecurity education. We have cybersecurity engineers, and then we have cybersecurity analysts. Cybersecurity analysts have a good fundamental understanding of cybersecurity, but they utilize tools to mitigate threats, where your cybersecurity engineers are the ones that are typically creating those tools and expanding upon those tools and growing them in a way that the analysts can then use. And they're really the theoretical base. So I may be wrong, and I'm open to being corrected, but to me, the difference between data science literacy and a data science in a pure form is the data science is going to be more that theoretical, that high-end understanding of what's in the background, where that data science literate piece is something that everybody should have, because that is our world nowadays. We have so much data, and we need to understand how Facebook algorithms work. Things of that's part of what being data science literate to me is that understanding of the massive amounts of data that are being presented to us, collected on us, and we're being called to interpret.
Yeah, and not a lot to add there from my perspective, but we, obviously at IBM, we've got people at the entry level. Almost everyone needs to be data literate. And then we've got the data scientists who are taking large amounts of data and really looking at how you apply it, how you create new, they interact with our AI team, or they are on the AI team. They're looking at how we use data to create and inform better products, better services, faster, more efficient ways of doing things. So it's the applied use of all of the data rather than just understanding what the data tells you, or understanding how to use it, but actually using it.
Excellent. Thank you all. One more question for me, and then I have a bunch of questions I'll try to also start filtering in from the chat and keep them coming as well. And Anthony, you started talking a little bit, especially with what you're seeing at the state level in Arkansas around the work that you all have been doing, but really curious to dig in a bit more, especially as you were talking about like the scaffolding. And there was a question about like, what does this look like as early as like kindergarten and first grade? But just curious more about what you all are doing at the kind of district level, state level, district level, down to the practitioners. And then how is that filtering up as we tie in the kind of industry demand there, with then be keen on Lydia from the IBM standpoint, like how are you all trying to be proactive and outreach to the schools that are out there thinking about what does this look like? What is IBM, as an example, needing, and how can they scaffold and create a pipeline to make sure they're setting students up if they choose that as their journey? So would love to kind of dig in a bit deeper there and give some more context to what that's looking like on both ends there.
Do you want me to start? I'm happy to begin. So I think, it's when you think about the pipeline, particularly sort of in that middle to early high school and then high school age, it's tools that support the data analysis and understanding the tools. It may be exposure to things like Google Sheets or Data Commons or Tableau, but I think the caution would be people get really tied to the tools and not having the conversation about the concepts behind the tools. What is it that the tools are enabling us to do? So it's a both and, not an either or. It's great for students to learn them, be proficient in them, and be able to, earn a badge or demonstrate what they can do with them. I think that's a great skill, especially at that age, to be able to take on to an internship or to spark interest and sort of be prepared to do the more advanced work. The downside is once you get so tied to a tool, you may sort of lose sight of the bigger concepts of what's behind it and why are you using this tool and how would you swap in one for another. And then in the upper grades, it's really starting to think about more the potential, the bigger ideas of gamification and starting simulations and things that you would do in more of an applied setting. We have Skills Build. I'm putting a link in there. That's the student version. We also have Skills Build. Right now it's called Skills Build for job seekers. We use that with community colleges, four-year colleges, and then we have other programs that have additional content for universities. Then we do have our data scientists working with faculty members at colleges around the world. So we're working in multiple levels with our IBMers who volunteer to work with schools and universities around how do we make sure that we're developing this talent pipeline, a robust talent pipeline. And it's everything from building capacity and the courses and understanding to guest lectures and exposure, hearing from people who do this work. So, it runs the gamut. I think, and I think we're going to get into this a little bit later. It's one thing for people to hear what's needed once you get into the workplace, but there are a lot of things that need to happen from frameworks and curriculum and standards and all those things that require policy to be put in place. So I think I'll pause there because I think you may be going to some of those policy questions before we wrap.
And Josh, I'll jump in here and one, from a very practical, just implementation standpoint, we in Arkansas require all K-8 students to be taught what we call our computer science and computing standards, which we include a data strand in, a data science strand within it. So every student is being taught these standards, or should be being taught these standards K through 8. And then, as I said, our high school standards, they all include a data science thread within them. And starting this fall, we will have a graduation requirement of 1 high school credit in computer science. So that will be there. But you asked about the earlier grade levels. So I just went out quickly and pulled up our standards. And, I was looking through them and thinking about what had been said and what had been shared, and especially what Lydia was just saying. And I came across this one, and that's a kindergarten standard. That's what the K stands for in it. And I think that's really what the heart of our data science standards, K through 8, are getting at, is what is the purpose for data collection? Why are we collecting this data? If we're just collecting it to create charts within a math class that the students don't see any relevance in or reason for, they're never going to gain how many people who are not mathematicians really understand what a histogram is telling them? And so that's the difference. The reason has to be there, and it has to be clear, and it has to be made clear to teachers and students, or we're just teaching theory for theoretical sake, and that's not going to stick with students when they become adults.
Thank you. Brandeis, one question I saw in the chat and thinking about the work that you're doing with the looming teacher shortage that's out there, that's a hot topic, and everything that our educators have been going through and students and families over these last few years, but understanding the scope and magnitude of that issue alone, and then adding in how do you make sure educators are prepared to be able to teach the next generation of people to be data literate and data scientists. How do we do all of that? And what are your thoughts and advice to people that are stressed out, and rightfully so, about that right now?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I don't think we have enough time in order to say what we need to do, because we really have to unpack what's going on inside of the education space. Definitely, there has been some struggles, a lot of mental health challenges, a lot of traumaed existences that we all have been living through, and it's affecting not only the learners, so the kids, but also affects the adults. So I want to definitely hold space for that, is that I see you. In that space. But I think that there needs to be, number one, an acknowledgement and an atonement for all of the pressure that has been put on educators during this time. And then there needs to be, I think, a plan and a strategy moving forward about how to best support educators, like really support educators. So yes, CTEs are important over the summer, but what is the pay structure for that? What is the concrete type of templates that are actionable so that the integration of any new curriculum is seamless? So having these conversations, I call them master classes or workshops, that really are to bring educators together and have these conversations of what works and what doesn't. Because what is kind of the problem, I think, within the education space is that we all are siloed. And being in that silo, you do your own little set of lesson plans. You then hope that the learners actually learn something, and then you get evaluate on it and you move on to the next thing. But we don't come together as educators and actually have conversation about what works and what doesn't, and making sure that we remove what doesn't and we elevate what works. And we understand that this could be a regional issue, it could be grade level, but this is the conversation that we need to have more of inside of the data educator space, because there is a vacuum. There's no one talking about that. So all of the policies coming down have educators at the table, but then the policy is in place and no one is doing an assessment and an inventory of whether or not it's working. And that's the piece that I want to hopefully be part of that change agent, so that we are updating, because data education needs to update regularly. That's my start. I don't know the rest. So other people can chime in on the chat and chime in here, because definitely open to how we move forward, because educators just, we deal with a lot. So.
Yeah, no. Thank you for that, and see some really interesting comments. I know we're going to talk a little bit on the policy level in the next panel, but as we close out, before we go, I think one thing I would love to hear from everyone is, we all go to these events, both virtual and in person, and we are excited and we're inspired, and then Monday morning comes, you're like, what was that thing that I went to? What were we talking about? What had me so fired up? Let me check my notes. And so if you had to like distill it all down to be able to pass that Monday morning test, like what's one thing that you would encourage people to do come Monday morning to continue either this conversation, to continue this movement around thinking about data science for everyone, making a commitment, but just curious as to what can we all do on that Monday morning when we kind of forget what were we attending, but we know that this topic was so crucial and important to fight for.
I mean, I think, you know, IBM committed to skill 30 million people by 2030. And so we've put a lot of free tools out there, content and tools. Most of it is on Skills Build. I encourage you all to go look at it. But figure out what the one thing is that you can move in your role and how you can do it. And if you can take one person with you when you move it, figure out who the one person is. I mean, I think events like this are fantastic for learning something new, finding new tools, and finding new collaborators. So if you pick one person from this group and you find one thing that you can do together to advance this work, that would be my takeaway for you.
I guess I'll chime in here. I think there's a number of steps that you can take on Monday morning. I love Lydia's idea of connect with one person here. The other thing that I'll concentrate on is that I think it's important in order to give yourself small doses of data learning as an adult. It's super important. I'm going to drop in the chat a couple of different newsletters. One is mine. I shameless plug it. Rebel Tech newsletter comes out every 2 weeks or so. But there is AI Ethics Weekly as well. I'll drop into the chat that I think is important. So this is what you can talk about. You can have a 15 minutes where everyone talks about what you read. And then you can actually move that conversation to how could be what we read could now be part of a lesson plan, right? That can be discussed. So it'll be this co-creation type of activity. So that's what I think is really those small doses of what is happening in data news to help.
And I'll bring the government perspective here, so to speak. Again, as I've worked with computer science education throughout, the past 8 years, I found that a big hurdle that we had to overcome early on was just getting states to define what is computer science, and by define we meant right standards and where they're being taught and who's responsible for them. And I think that's the big issue that many of you will find within your states. I know we have some international people here, so I'm talking generalities to the US. But I think your Monday morning, if I was from a state perspective or really interested in ensuring that every student, every person was going to get exposed to this and had proper data science and data science literacy education, is I'd start looking at my K-12 system. Where are those standards? Where are they housed? Are they proper? Are they actual data science and data science literacy? And if you can't find them, then they probably don't exist. So are we leaving it only to academia to teach people data science? If so, we're missing a good portion of our population. So your Monday morning task might be sending an email to someone in your state department saying, hey, where's data science and why aren't we teaching it?
Excellent. Thank you all for that. And I think for myself, from the philanthropic side of this, I think is asking ourselves a question like, how are we making sure that this is for everyone and that the for everyone is so crucial? The same way we've been big supporters of computer science for all, and I see Leanne here on the chat, the same reason with data science for everyone, like making sure that this isn't something that's for a subgroup of people. This is something that everyone should have equitable access and opportunities for. And how can we, from the philanthropic side, ensure that? And so sorry I didn't get to all the questions in the chat, but definitely encourage people to continue that conversation going. Super appreciative for everyone. Lydia, Brandeis, Anthony, thank you all, not only for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule, but also for the work that each of you are doing and the passion that you all bring to this. Really just honored to be in your presence, and I'm learning from you all. And so really grateful for this conversation and the continued conversation that will happen after this. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you.
been awesome and too short.
Too short.
And hey, Kumar,
Well-
good to see you again.
Well, I want to thank that amazing panel. I mean, what a set of rock stars. And what I loved was that they were live answering a lot of the comments that were happening in the chat. So I really encourage people to continue to keep posting as they're both having reactions or thoughts or responding, because as I said at the top, we're going to definitely track some of that. So we're coming up on our next section, which is, as folks might know, we call this the Commitment Showcase. It's an event about commitments, and we're actually going to talk about the incredible work that the community is doing. I just wanted to sort of take a quick second to explain, this is slightly different than a traditional event on a topic. Like you go to an event, people say, this is really important. You have a set of panelists. This event actually marks the end of a process that started a year ago, and which was a previous commitment showcase. And it's a model that I used to do a lot when I was in the Obama White House. A number of folks on this call know, which is anytime you're working on a big problem or big opportunity, like how do we give computer science to every kid, or how do we expand access to data science education, it actually requires the big we, companies, nonprofits, state and local government, the role of the individual volunteer, scientist, technologist. And when that big we can feel very overwhelming. And one of the most important things you can do is actually give people basic frameworks for saying, I want to step up and find something specific I can do in my community and have a deadline of some event with a larger goal where I can be ready to talk about to my colleagues, both not because it's going to be the full answer, but because it's a meaningful step forward. I can inspire others, more people can find my work, and it can help build community. So I'm super excited that, since last year to now, we've had 70 new commitments that have been developed and are getting announced today. You're going to get a sampling of that today. But a lot of that, we had an amazing set a year ago. And a lot of what we're announcing today builds on the inspiration and shows a growing and expanding community. So if you're inspired by some of the things that we're talking about today, I really hope that you'll reach out and say, here's what you'd want to do by the same time next year. I think a couple of things I just wanted to acknowledge. The first is that a number of the people who are participating with us today were actually commitment makers a year ago, like SAP, even the San Francisco 49ers, the Maryland Department of Education. A number of them have actually gone on to make serious progress on the commitments they made last year. So I think that's to be commended. The second is, if you're one of those 70 organizations that are making a commitment today, we won't be able to cover all of them, but we'd love to have you talk about your commitment in the chat and say, today we're announcing that. You can add in if you're looking for immediate partners or other things attached to it, because we're going to track that, and that can be a great way for people to get involved. Finally, I'll just say that part of the goal of doing this work is so that we're generating sort of imagine if lists. So even if you sort of see an idea and a conversation that's happening and you're like, I can imagine X and Y stepping up, I can imagine IBM doing this, you should feel free to drop that in the chat. So what I'm going to pass to our friends at the Learning Agency to tee up a video. This is actually like a sampling of some of the amazing commitments that have been developed. We've also interspersed into these videos student voices for how this work can actually play out on the ground. And so partly this is an effort because we have a wealth of riches of all this amazing work, and we also want to create some content that can live on. So let's cue that video, and then we can talk about it on the other end.
ACTE commits to supporting CTE data science programs to meet talent needs and prepare learners for career success.
We look forward to reaching many more learners in the year ahead, ensuring that data science education is accessible to all.
And the reason that data science is important, especially to me, and I feel as though with my community, is that statistics are often, used to represent people, and that is always a crucial thing. When you bring up a number, people pay attention, they notice, and they take, that to be the truth. And so when we have equity in these spaces, what we're ultimately doing is changing narratives, or creating narratives and enabling people to be represented in the best way possible.
We're accepting proposals to a number of programs that support data science education, teaching, research, and increasing students' interest in STEM careers.
We at ConLab School and Khan Academy are committed to data science education, which we see as a key facet in modernizing math education.
I am so glad that I chose this elective because I have learned to look at the world around me and question why it is and how it came to be the way it is.
We are building upon our commitment from last year, which was to create a data science micro-credential for Utah secondary math teachers to engage with, and we are starting a data science pilot program.
Our ADAPT courses have already reached students in all the colleges of the university. This fall, we will be scaling up the number of courses and introducing new internship opportunities in social impact data science.
Our current commitment to data science is in our 5th grade social studies classrooms, where students are using data to figure out the world.
We're bringing data science to over 120,000 students across grades UT K-12 and partnering with our regional institutes of higher education to offer a data science sequence that articulates to college credit.
This is a great opportunity to get my foot in the door with learning how to code, because I didn't want to go to a university never having coded before. Other peers and everyone in my class, they had heavy coding history. They took AP computer science and all these different coding courses. And if I didn't take IDS, I would have been really behind in comparison. Maybe implementing this one class can change a lot of different students' perspectives on different things.
Jay Sorensen, Ed Tech Coordinator in the Oxnard Union High School District.
Sunny Sajor, Math Instructional Specialist.
The Oxnard Union High School District commits to increasing the number of data science sections, the number of schools offering data science, and the number of teachers trained on the Bootstrap data science curriculum in 2022-23.
We commit to creating 50 weekly mini lessons using SAS Datafly to help educators build data literacy in an engaging and approachable way.
It's kind of like a new start for me because I feel more, I felt more confident in myself, and it was like, wow, I'm very much understanding this, and I could never feel like that before.
We're designing a year-long data science curriculum for high schools, leading to a Microsoft Excel certification. We're committing to create 6 new data science activities and record videos for each one on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/STEMcoding.
Through our social impact program, NetApp Data Explorers, and our partnership with the world's largest lesson, UNICEF and UNESCO, NetApp is committed to reaching hundreds of thousands of young people around the world with empowering data-centered learning experiences.
Pretty awesome. And I want to thank all of the amazing commitment makers who are stepping up today. I hope folks keep at, we added a link to the datascienceforeveryone.org commitments directory where folks can check these out, but I really recommend everyone add in their commitments themselves if you're attending, because I think you'll add a lot more color and why you're excited and ways that you want people to step up. For me, this is incredibly motivating. This is actual work that people are stepping up to do, inspired by it. So I hope people both put their imagine if lists and things that they're just thinking about, want help on, that they would love to announce by the same event next year. So I'm hopeful that this is inspiring to you, and that this actually meets the charge of the panel and our keynote speaker at the top, which is how do we expand more of these opportunities to more kids everywhere. So with that, let me pass it to we're going to keep it moving, pass it to our second big panel, which is really about digging in on this question around policy and what are the ways that this work can actually implement itself on the ground. And so let me welcome our panel onto our virtual stage. Great. And let me pass it to Bill, who will be our moderator.
Thanks so much, Kumar, and thanks for that that really inspiring and fascinating video. Thanks so much for that, and for all the people who made commitments. My name is Bill Tucker. I serve as Senior Advisor on the Education Pathways team at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And I get to participate, but also help moderate with this fantastic panel. As before, I'll encourage people to put any questions in the chat. I'll try to be moderating those and bring those questions and comments into the conversation. And as Kumar said, we opened up with a lot around the why this work is important. And in the last panel, we began to get into the how, and we're going to go a little further here. We've got three outstanding experts who each kind of have a different vantage point from how do we implement data science education, not just at the classroom level, but thinking about the different structures, systems, policies, and ways in which we do that. So I want to briefly introduce each one, but I'll ask you, as you introduce yourself, to, by way of doing that, tell us the work you're doing, how it's helping to further data science education. So Lizzette, I'll start with you, Vice President of Policy at ExcelinEd.
Hi, thank you, Bill. So I'm going to kind of go at it more from how I kind of came into this conversation. So 2 years ago, my boss listened to the Freakonomics Stephen Levitt podcast and was fascinated around his perspective and his advocacy for data science education. As both as a science, but also as an opportunity to apply data literacy tools to education pathways. We are deeply in the weeds around post-secondary pathways and meaningful credential acquisition. And so it's imperative that part of this focus include the ability for students to be data scientists and apply that knowledge and skill set throughout their K-12 post-secondary educational careers to be truly prepared for the jobs both of today and tomorrow. I'm also very interested in the learnings about data science, which is somewhat of a nascent policy for me, but it's been around for years, and it came up in Texas when I was working at the Texas Education Agency around the Algebra 2 debate. And whether or not, students really needed to take Algebra 2. Now, I'm not saying that we should get rid of it, but that was where, these kind of conversations had started back in the day. As you all know very well, Yuri Treisman with the Data Center, who's basically in my backyard in Austin, he's been steeped in this work. And I'm excited that this coalition is going to be digging even deeper into the application of data science and data literacy in our systems of education.
Thanks so much, and look forward to hearing more from your perspective on policies and incentives and the ways in which you see those helping to really help us further data science education. Adanna, let me pass it over to you. How's the work you're doing helping to further the work?
Absolutely. Hi, Bill, and hi, everyone. It's great to be here today. My name is Adanna Ukah, and I lead partnerships at Grow with Google, which is Google's commitment and economic mobility initiative to train Americans and global learners for the jobs of today and tomorrow. We do many things at Google, including hiring for a ton of data science roles. I took a look right before this panel, and there are 1,200 open roles this week in data science. So we see our role as three-part. One, we want to take what we know at Google around data science and the key skills needed to succeed in a role and really share that out with leading schools and districts. Two, we really hope to equip those who are really leading on the ground in states that are driving forward this data science work, not only with the resources they need and the funding, but also with the learning and the partnerships. We can work hand in hand and support efforts like Teacher PD. And then finally, we just invest in time. So a big part of my work is sitting with schools and districts and making sure that we're learning what the actual learner needs are on the ground and building the right tools at Google to make sure that we can get folks trained in the right way. So I'm really here as a supplement, and we see a lot of our work as following the lead on the states and people and leaders who are doing this great work to advance DS.
Fantastic, thanks so much. And we're gonna look forward to hearing more about what you've learned about some of those pieces. What are the resources that matter, Teacher PD, all those sorts of things. But we also have McKenzie Snow, who is Deputy Secretary of Education for the state of Virginia. McKenzie, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you all. I think the first perspective we approach this work with is the fact that data science is a new basic skill. We know that all learners must be prepared to consume data, to accurately communicate data, and to use data to inform decision making. And I'm looking forward to diving into some of the best practices we're implementing here in Virginia. But alongside Arkansas, who I think you heard from earlier today, Virginia is helping lead the way in data science education. One specific policy tool are data science or computer science or STEM specific schools like governor schools, magnet schools, lab schools. In fact, 16 of our 19 full-time program governor schools are STEM based. We also have a national model in a regional lottery-based magnet school called Code RVA Regional High School, where a third of graduates from 15 different school divisions earn an associate's degree in computer science. And we are currently working based on new funds enacted in our recently passed budget to replicate this high quality model across the Commonwealth and a network of new computer science lab schools that are going to serve all 8 of our school division regions. So that's just a taste of some of our best practices, but looking forward to diving into that more.
I love that, McKenzie. And I think you got us right off on a great segue to the question that I wanted to ask is what models or policies do you all see? You just mentioned the lab schools as one model or approach to expanding the access to data science education. Among this really smart group, what other models do you see, or what other policies do you see that are really effective at helping expand access?
I'll let others jump in first.
Well, I'll just jump in from more of a perspective around just the play, right? Because as you know, as y'all have been doing this work over the last year, we're still trying to figure out what is the data science work, like what does it mean, what courses, where do kids need to go. And so I just wanted to actually kind of give an example of how code.org really kind of grew over the last 3 or 4 years. Basically it's a curriculum, right? I mean, they started off with a curriculum, and then they worked to build national and state partners like ExcelinEd to build awareness about the issue, the need that every student should take a coding course, or at least do coding for an hour, right? And being able to push advocacy for and establish relationships at the state level to support, policies that would advance data science education. I know we have had some conversations about, what is there the ability for us to substitute a math course? Where does this land when it comes to social studies and science? There's so much that is involved in the play, and I think there needs to be a larger, advocacy play for the value of data science and what it really means. I mean, y'all have been doing this work for so long, but in many ways, we're just getting even just computer science recognized. Obviously, like you have Arkansas and Virginia as the lead states, but it's still not everywhere it needs to be. I loved watching the video. I love the idea of creating micro-credentials so that teachers can teach data science, because I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done as far as awareness is concerned. And also building the pathways, right? Where does this start and where does it end? And it shouldn't end, right? But we've got to be able to create that foundation for which kids can actually learn throughout their career in order to be able to acquire a knowledge in the data science space. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out. Not really a policy per se, but policy play more than anything.
And I think another, and I'm going to tee up Adanna, but another key lever that we are pulling is partnering with industry to support computer and data science education and workforce development, like Virginia's partnership with Google. Actually, Google recently invested $300 million in a new Reston data center, and as a part of that announcement, they also invested $250K in a Virginia-based nonprofit called Code VA to help support the launch of this network of computer science-focused lab schools modeled after the pioneering Code RVA, but also to support the development of the current and future computer science teaching workforce across the Commonwealth. We're using Google's CS First program aligned to our Virginia state standards and deploying that in partnership again with this local nonprofit called Code VA and their professional development programming. And then finally, Grow with Google also partnered with 23 of our community colleges and 5 of our higher education centers to offer access for free to Google Computer Science Career Certificates. So we are definitely focused on partnership with industry and in addition to a number of additional policies. So I'll kick it to you, Adanna.
Thanks, McKenzie. That was a great tee up. And it's a partnership we're really excited by. When you ask the question of, when coming from the Google seat, which I'm pretty new to joining, I joined Google in November, but we're really looking for the energy. And so when we see things like statewide announcements or policies around CS for all, when we see great talent hubs or learning hubs or regional centers devoted to data science, that gives us such a strong indicator that we need to follow that energy. And I think when you look at McKenzie's team, all the great work that's being done in Virginia, when we had the opportunity to connect and partner and really invest and double down, we said this is a great place to make a big bet. There's already so much strong foundational work, there's policy and advocacy lined up, and we're able to come in kind of with a cavalry and say, let us equip you, let's learn together, let's build together. If anything, I think the hardest thing about my job is figuring out where to really funnel energy and resources. And for us, what we're looking for is that statewide commitment, really seeing folks in the education department, seeing teachers who are excited and eager for this training and needing the resourcing. And that's what we see as a leading indicator. At Grow with Google, a lot of our work is with adult learners, and we do a ton of work in workforce development. We sit closely to community colleges. We're thinking about dual enrollment, but when it comes to K-12, we almost need a little bit more information to really know where to focus our efforts because we don't know where to start. And Google is the expert on hiring for data science and getting other employers to make those commitments, but we really need the leaders and the folks in K-12 to show us where to go. And policies and statements are just one way for us to say, hey, we should look in more and figure out who to talk to.
I really appreciate that. And thinking about the dynamic nature of how that momentum can build and attract more partners that can then offer resources to help with that implementation side. And Adanna, I really also appreciate your clarity around where Google and perhaps other companies that might have similar resources or interests, where you're best positioned to help schools and education systems understand, well, here are the things that our employees will need and students will need. Here are the resources, and where you're not as well positioned or not as knowledgeable and really need that partnership. I want to ask you, Adanna, you mentioned equip. And so we can have things at the policy level and we can have models, but unless we actually support educators and then students and their families, we're not going to end up with the right end goal. Adanna, maybe I'll start with you because you talked a little bit about equipping teachers and PD. How should we think about those? What have you seen to be successful? Where are you seeing momentum in that area?
Sure. And I'll be really honest, Bill, this is an area where we're really spending a ton of time learning. I should have given this background, but when we think about this really important data science work at Google, there are 2 teams. I'm representing both today. We have Grow with Google, which is economic mobility. We build a cert. We have a data analytics cert. We talk about how it ties to data science roles, and we hire for it at Google, and we get other companies to commit to hiring for it. So a lot of our work is saying it's not just the training. We as Google need to be leaders in hiring folks right out of K-12 to do these jobs at Google and tell other big companies to do that too. The other work is code for all, and everything we do at Google is design for all, build for everyone, right? We have this general sense of what to do, but when it comes to actually embedding ourselves in schools and districts and doing this deep state work, like I said, what we're doing is always taking the lead. And so what we find to be really helpful is taking something that is in an early kind of generative, like a prototype form, and actually bringing it to teachers and saying, does this work? How does this align to your standards? How does this align to your curriculum? How would you actually implement this? I was in Anaheim, California a few weeks ago, sitting with our first big school district partner, sitting with students and teachers and talking about all the things that didn't work, because frankly, there's no way to fix it than to actually understand what those learnings are. So that's not a big seismic scale answer, but a big part of our job here is learning how to take something that we built for everyone and actually make it work at an individual state level. And that takes a lot of listening and just kind of humility, knowing that, you know, we're not in schools and we're not in classrooms, and that's what it really takes to get this right.
Yeah, I want to jump on that a little bit, because I think that is part of the issue, right? Is policymakers aren't necessarily aware of data science, right? Or data science education. They have, you know, in many cases, you know, computer science, you know, for all, or code.org or whatever, have kind of taken that step, that campaign on, and have made some policy wins within states, whether it's requiring as graduation requirements or encouraging industry partnerships like y'all have in Virginia and in Arkansas. It's like, I think from my perspective, because we work with state policymakers, I don't really know if the knowledge is quite there yet, or what it even means, right? And so we really need an advocacy and awareness campaign at the policymaker level to really talk about what is data science education and why do our kids need it. Again, tying it to these college and career pathway work is really important, but there's not, it's kind of what Adanna said. It's like, where does it start? You know, where do we start in elementary school? Do we start exposing children in these different content areas in these earlier stages so that it's not this high school thing? Because if it becomes a high school thing, you're going to have an equity issue and you're going to have an access issue, because not every kid is just going to be able to naturally jump on the stuff that's required in order to be able to interpret data, even understand data or look at data, right? So I just think that that's really important. You know, I don't know where y'all are as far as you know, the Algebra 2 conversation, but I just want to make one statement that I hope that this doesn't become an or for that subject. You know, having access to Algebra 2 is an equity issue in and of itself, because it definitely shows that you're prepared for college, and that's what we want kids to do. But where else does this lie, and where does it lie within the trajectory or capstone or whatever, right? They call it in education, so that kids have that step in that process. And I just don't think we're there yet. As you can tell from my lack of knowledge, but I'm learning. And then, of course, the quality piece is so critical. One of the things that we have seen with Pathways work is that, you know, now it's like, oh, well, we have this pathway, this CTE course, so we're going to get credit. And it doesn't matter the level of quality. Quality is so important, particularly as you start developing this policy in states. We've got to make sure that the classes that are being offered are actually I'm sorry, I was reading the chat, but we just need to make sure that you know that there is a level of standardization in the quality of the coursework, so that you don't just have data science for the purpose of having data science.
Yeah, McKenzie, these are all issues you have to be grappling with as you think about the education system in Virginia. I'm really interested in your perspective.
Thanks. And thanks, Lizzette. There's a lot to unpack in your good comments. I think the first piece around how to talk to policymakers about the importance of data science is to point out to them that they use data science and data literacy in their everyday work. Here in Virginia, Governor Youngkin is extremely driven by data and decision making. We are also very driven by data and the education policy decisions that we make every day. So that's important to point out. One of our top priorities has been around transparency and accountability, and ensuring that parents actually understand the assessment reports that they're receiving from their schools, and that's actionable information that shows them where their child is and what's needed, if anything, to get them on track for success. And data literacy is core to being able to access that information for families. So those are just two thoughts. I think also the economic perspective we've talked around a bit, around having rigorous data science and K-12 education being critical to a growing economy, and especially to the Commonwealth's growing economy. We have three main employer demand areas: computer science and information technology, military, and the federal government being having Nova and being close to DC. And we also know that computer science and data science careers are some of the highest wage opportunities with the tallest career ladders. In Virginia, our STEM jobs are expected to grow at a faster rate than all other occupations through 2028, especially in the fields of computational thinking and cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. So this is all important information, both at a national level and a state level, that helps inform decision makers. On the high quality and on the rigorous standards side, we are actually just beginning to pilot new data science standards next school year, in the 22-23 school year, in 12 school divisions. And there were a couple notes around ensuring that geographic diversity and socioeconomic diversity is reflected in access. And we specifically partnered with divisions that reflect that diversity. So that's one example of intentionality around that space. And in these rigorous standards, we're really working to move beyond data literacy and offering rigorous data science and K-12 education, including that can earn math credit and that could potentially earn college credit. So a few thoughts around piggybacking on Lizette's comments.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I want to actually connect back to two threads in the chat. One has been around, Lizzette, this issue around Algebra 2 and I think broader math requirements that you mentioned. I will actually post a link to, you mentioned the Dana Center and Uri Treisman at University of Texas. They actually, in working with the state of Georgia, rather than saying it's an either or, they actually work with the state of Georgia to modernize their Algebra 2 course, to take out some of the things that were pretty extraneous for student learning and really only valuable if you're maybe going into further STEM pathways, and integrate in more statistics, probability, data literacy. In Georgia, Algebra 2 is a required course. So what they were doing is saying, well, these are things that all students need and are going to be valuable no matter what pathway you may take. In Georgia, in the university system, they have multiple pathways. You can be on a calculus pathway, you can be on a stats pathway. So that's one way in which they've sort of threaded that needle. I put the link to the framework there so people can access that. I think it's a really novel way of not bifurcating. Other states are thinking about alternatives, so this is a live issue. The other issue that I wanted to connect in the chat, and McKenzie, you began to actually reference it a little bit. Jonathan asked about, hey, there's a lot of high tech work in the DC area, Northern Virginia. How does this relate to more rural communities? I noted William Murphy, who was the Morehouse student who was on the student video, talked about equities in this space. One of the other students who had taken the Introduction to Data Science course, and I know he's at Berkeley because I've seen the rest of that clip, was really aware that other students around him, more affluent students, had been exposed to coding and enrichment programs and all sorts of things. And so he felt like it was something that put him on a more even playing field since he had the opportunity for this class. McKenzie, you began to mention it. School divisions, school districts, I think your divisions are equal to school districts. Other people say it, really being thoughtful about where these are piloted. As we think about policies and models, what else should we do to ensure that we're not just replicating a lot of the inequities we have in terms of access to advanced classes or enrichments? What can we do now from the beginning to ensure we've got opportunities for the many students that we need to be able to be really strong and have this opportunity in data science?
So I think one piece is to harken back to many of our regional schools that go beyond school division boundaries, go beyond zip codes, and serve a multitude of learners from different communities. Additionally, within school divisions, we have specialty centers in Virginia. They are like magnet schools. They're typically within a larger school division. We also have CTE offerings like Governor's STEM academies and engineering programs. But I think one really promising policy that we are still exploring are course choice policies, especially statewide course choice options that can further expand access to data science education.
Lizzette or Adanna, do you have thoughts on this really important issue around equity of access and opportunity?
Well, I mean, it's tough, right? Because we don't have access right now. You know, I told the story once about, you know, about my daughter and about how she, you know, she wanted to take calculus. I said, why don't you take AP statistics? And she did, and she really struggled. And she's a math person. She loves math, but she really struggled. And it's because there was no other opportunities leading up to that class. So it's going to take a lot of work, right? Especially if you think about, you know, where we are right now with our system, right? I mean, we're all recovering from COVID, right? And the fact of the matter is, we're going to see a lot of states are going to be, a lot of students are going to be struggling in math. We're going to probably lose a lot of years in math. So we really, at the very least, need to ensure a strong math education is at least part of the process. I think, you know, it's like, you know, some people like to say, well, you know, I was never good at math. Well, I mean, you don't go to a cocktail party, right, and say, well, I'm not really good at reading, right? So part of it is we have to do our job in math education first. And then as it gets stronger, then obviously y'all are the experts, right? Then that's where it can branch out and you start adding these elements of data science. I mean, I saw some really great, that's why I kept getting distracted, because I saw some really great examples that are happening out there. It's just not happening in this big holistic way. It's a concern. It's a huge concern because, you know, there's so many kids that don't even have a strong math course in elementary school, or never mind Algebra 1, right? So it's so tough, particularly when many people in the system are fatigued and thinking, oh my gosh, here's yet another thing. So that's the other thing that really needs to be battled and needs to be couched as, I can't remember if it was Adanna said it or McKenzie said it, but it needs to be there because of the jobs out there, and the fact of the matter that our kids need to be ready for this new world, regardless of what path they take.
There's so much here. Go ahead, Adanna, and then I'm going to move us to our last question because we're running out of time.
No, apologies for interrupting, but I think Dave here asks the right question. I had less of an answer than a reflection. Dave said, is there a point at which universities and employers will prefer those with data science capability over BC calculus? I struggled in BC calculus. I think when we think about the rural work that Grow with Google is trying to do, it really feels like it's almost alien, right? If you don't have that foundational math, how are we going to try and help code for all? When I think about the role of Google, I think I'm not using calculus, but when we think about the competencies that build into data science, like deep learning, data visualization, I think part of our work and part of my role is to translate what that actually means. We see really strong hiring for data science, and then we see schools actually adopt that curriculum. I'm living in New York, working for Google, but I'm from Iowa City, Iowa, right? And like part of the work that I think it's our job at Google is to go to these smaller and more rural employers and say, you're already hiring for data science. Let's start using that language and terminology so we can make sure that we're speaking about it the right way and get the policies and schools eventually lined up to recognize that we're all talking about the same skill and competency using different words.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate that. It's interesting to think about how things are changing and have already changed in many ways. So this is similar to the call out from the last panel. I want to ask each of you, and I'll give my own too, for a takeaway, a recommendation that you would make that our colleagues who are listening in could take with them, or an action that you'd like to recommend for the field as a takeaway or leave behind for this panel. McKenzie, would you be willing to start us off?
Sure, and if you'll allow me, I'm going to take two, because one of our main policy objectives right now is to implement these rigorous standards in our pilot program well, and to provide school divisions the support that they need to implement new standards well. And I just want to impress upon the importance of ongoing evidence-based professional development. We adopted computer science standards in 2017, and we are still working to continue to support that implementation through professional development. Also, we talked briefly about teacher micro-credentials and meeting teachers where they are. And I think that is an important first step, but also working with teacher preparation programs, which are very focused on traditional math pathways, to also prepare them for data science and computer science instruction. And that is an area we continue to grow in. And then the last main takeaway I would mention is a point that was made earlier, and it's been made a couple of times, but it's to communicate the importance of data science to learners in the workforce. Learners have unique interests, they have unique talents, and we need to diversify and expand math learning opportunities, especially in fields where industry is demanding it, like computer science and data science. And student awareness and outreach, especially peer-to-peer outreach, is extremely effective, and student ambassadors. And we actually have one here in our office, Denise Daniels, if you'll turn on your video, who's our computer science and data science education fellow. She's pursuing her master's in computer science now and getting ready to present her thesis on how students interact and perform with avatar teachers. So great student ambassadors like Denise are paramount.
Was that Adanna?
I know. I was like, I don't know. We're kind of looking at each other. You gonna go? You gonna go? Well, McKenzie kind of took away my thunder there, because it is, for me, particularly given the communities that we, the policymakers that we work with, we really need to be able to clarify and define the goals of data science education and the why that our kids need it. It's just really important. I think there's a lot of unbundling to do because it's so vast. I mean, somebody in here mentioned science. Like, why don't, we got the next generation of science standards coming out. Where is the incorporation of, again, having to be able to interpret data? It's just so important. It's in the job that I do every day, right? We look at NAEP scores, we look at student assessment scores, and then we try to figure out who's doing what. So it really is applicable across, all the content areas. And so we really need to think about it, not only within the scope of math, but also in the scope of the other sciences and the other content areas that kids are learning in their day-to-day education.
Plus one, McKenzie and Lizzette both made incredible points. If anything, I would just underscore what they both said. I think per my earlier comment on nomenclature, just having each of us on this call actually look at a data science course and understand what it means. It seems so simple, but we, in every single district, make sure that the people who are teaching the data analytics or science cert take it. And so often that's just not the first indicator, but I'd suggest that each of us really take the time to understand what we're talking about, and it'll help us work together better.
I love these suggestions, especially let's actually deal with the specifics and the substance. The one that's on my mind, since math came up so much in the chat and also a little bit in these comments is I can't get the statistic out of my head. The National Study of Learning Mindsets, which is a longitudinal project that has followed students over many years throughout high school and into their post-secondary pathways, nationally representative sample. They have a statistic that fewer than 50% of the students who entered into ninth grade with high math interest, these are students who are like, I love math, give me more. Fewer than 50% made it to pre-calc or above. The number was 28.8% for Black students. So just over a quarter of Black students who are like, I love math, entering into ninth grade, actually made it through the sequences that we have. So whatever we can do, and if data science is one of the ways that we can bring more relevance to what we're doing for students and engaging them, again, not doing that in a rigorous way and making sure that aligns with what they need in their future. But if that's one of the levers that we can use to bring more relevance and make sure that we're not losing 3/4 of those Black students or more than half of all students who say they love math, that's something we need to do and must do it. So with that, I've had my word. I want to thank my fellow panelists. Thank you all so much for your ideas and your insights, and I will pass it back over. Kumar, I think I'm passing it back to you.
Amazing. Well, I want to thank that amazing panel, an incredible amount of wisdom that cuts across practical work, work on the ground, and how do we actually bring policymakers along. And, I've been watching all the chat. I hope people are both going to continue to sort of add their ideas. I saw a bunch of wish lists of what people hope to see, and hopefully those become commitments and action that comes out of this. And then also things that you think are missing or things that you want to add, because we're going to mine over this and follow up. And I also love all the back and forth that's going on. So let's move into our, we've got two big things left. We're going to have a closing keynote, and then we're going to have sort of a quick session on next steps. And then that will flow us right into our networking breakouts. So let me invite our closing keynote speaker, Saul Perlmutter, who I have to say is like a man about town. I have to say, Saul, the number of times somebody will talk to you and then tell me that they've been thinking about a conversation with you for weeks on end. So not only are you infectiously enthusiastic, but you have an incredible ability to give it to others. And, and the work that it's not like, you needed to sort of pick the future of data science and how to spread it to more children and more people as like a thing, but I don't know whether it's a hobby, it's a passion, it's a calling, but I think you're making sea changes in it. So I would love to just invite you onto the stage and give a little bit of your story of what got you excited, and then what is your charge to this community of people who are deeply committed to this mission of giving it to more children, and what things resonate for you and sort of your perspective. And I'm thrilled you were able to make the time.
Well, thank you so much. And I will say that I've been listening in to as much as I could. I was only able to join in the last hour, but I'm really enjoying hearing what everybody's talking about. It seems like it's just a great conference now to have a chance for people to talk together. And I'm certainly hearing that that sense that people would love to be able to do much more of this. So let me dive in and just throw in a few ideas that I thought would just be fun to add to the mix as you're beginning to close out the day. I may actually begin by just saying, where do I come to this from? What's my own experience? And there may be three different roles that got me into that, sort of bring me here into the conversation. The first one is that for the past 7-8 years, I've been the director of the Berkeley Institute for Data Science. And so I've been seeing this in the amazing wide-reaching roles that data science is playing across the whole university, between the students, the faculty, and the researchers in almost every field. So that's just been a very exciting and a rich experience to be part of. The second thing that brings me is I've been working also for the past maybe 8-9 years with a group of different Berkeley faculty from around the university, humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, to try to invent an idea for a new kind of course on what that might be called a scientific thinking course. And it's aimed at every student, whether or not they're going to be going into the sciences. The course has much of what a data science course needs that goes beyond the computer programming and the statistics. So if you think about what else is there in data science beyond programming and statistics, I think a lot of it is this. The course is now actually being taught in a growing number of universities around the country and some places around the world. But and particularly relevant to this group might be the fact that we're developing a high school version of the course. I'm working with the Nobel Prize Foundation. And the idea is that they have great access to teachers all around the world who grab their material every year. And the goal is to develop a full curriculum that can teach this material that can be taught for students everywhere in the world. And with open material. And then maybe perhaps third, I should just, in a very personal note, I should mention that my own earliest entree into science was due to my interest in computer programming and data analysis. And by just being a kid who got really interested in these things early, it gave me a way of working with research groups at a young age, well before I'd had the formal science courses. And I know this can be very valuable for young students as a way to become active participants in this grown-up world. So these are three of the things that brought me to the table here. And with this background, what I really want to do is maybe invite the group today on this activity to think of data science education as an even fuller, richer opportunity to engage students in the sorts of scientific thinking that we've been learning how to teach in this course that I was talking about. Because there's a rich array of techniques and approaches to how you think about problems, how you think about solving problems that I personally was never taught in any high school course or college course in sciences. And I only learned them by sort of osmosis as I started to do research as a grad student and a postdoc and a young faculty member. And there's no reason that they shouldn't be articulated and taught much sooner. These are things that I think are very important if you're teaching data science, because these are all teaching us how to be alert to all the different ways that we tend to fool ourselves, and then how we avoid falling into those traps, and how to hunt for what might be going wrong in our understanding of a problem and therefore our understanding of our world, and how to develop the intellectual stamina to stay with the problem and iterate until you get better answers. And then even how to work with teams of people to get the best of wisdom of crowds and not the worst of herd thinking. I think this is really important for data science education, and maybe I should just describe a discussion I had when I was pulled into a roundtable event to talk to some of the industry chief information officers from a large number of industries in the San Francisco Bay Area. So, a lot of the tech industry is here. And at one point in the evening, all of these participants, all these chief information officers, were starting to talk about how they have in their organizations, they have data scientists who can organize data and they can run analyses and they can make graphs. But that was really much harder for them to find anyone who can step back and ask whether they're asking the right question with the data, or whether the data was the right data even to use to answer the question. And so in some sense, what they were really looking for was a data science that was a much fuller picture of what it means to approach a problem. And so that's really what I think we have the opportunity to do now as we're trying to figure out what are we teaching and what does a curriculum look like at a K through 12 level. So maybe just since I've just with a few minutes left here, let me just give a little bit of nitty gritty. Let me just dive into some quick examples. I'll do a fast run through of the kinds of things that you would teach if you're doing this more full version of, I think, what data science education would include. I think it can begin with something as fundamental as students understanding that science makes its progress by a real joint commitment to tracking down a shared picture of external reality. That it's not good enough for people to say, well, I did my analysis, here's what I believe, you did your thing, here's what you believe, that you actually have to come to a common understanding, and that's really where the leverage of science comes from. And in our world today, I think that this is almost a radical statement to make. Shockingly enough, I think we have to teach a little bit about how the instrumentation and the measurements take you from what you start with, which is the visceral direct contact with reality that we have from our senses, to this more abstracted form, and that they allow us to model reality then. And then data science is really building on this ability to model reality based on understanding of where this data is coming from and in what way it's providing us a more direct contact with the real world. We need, I think, to teach the students the reasons to use statistics, not just the statistics techniques. As humans, we're constantly trying to pull signal out of the noise, but we're in danger of seeing patterns in random noise and thinking that they're significant. And so we really need to teach all of the ways in which we fall into those traps with much more data available to us, that in a modern data-rich world, the danger is even greater that we fall into those traps, because there's even more ways to see random data as a pattern and seeing its reality. More generally, I think we absolutely need to teach how probabilistic thinking works. So, as scientists, we use tentative statements in data and in data science. And this allows us to use data and results that aren't definitive, but almost no results are definitive. And in almost every case, you have to know how to work with probabilistic results. And this is also very important in allowing us to change our minds as we update and we learn something new. And I think, as a data scientist, you have to learn how to work with that comfort with uncertainty and what does it mean to work with probabilistic understanding. Similarly, we have to teach all the sanity checks that allow us to do the back of the envelope rapid estimation techniques. This is what physicists call Fermi techniques. So that at every step in a data science analysis, you have to be able to check that what you're getting is making sense. And you need some way to do rapid comparisons and rapid estimations to tell whether what you're seeing is at all sensible. We need, I think, to get a feel for, what Danny Kahneman would call the thinking fast and slow tendencies to fall into cognitive errors and learn how to guard for them. Maybe one of the most important ones is tendency to fall into confirmation bias. And the question is, how do we, what do we do to avoid analyzing and debugging our analyses over and over again until we get the answer that we expect to get? And there's a very strong tendency to do that. And so we've learned new techniques like blind analysis that allow us to do that analysis without falling into those techniques. And then finally, some of the things that have to do with the spirit of science, that we want people to feel that there's a can-do reason to stick to a problem and iteratively keep working on it long enough to get interesting results. And that most problems take more than just that first cut at them, and that students should feel empowered and excited by the fact that they can take on big problems in the world. I think it is also important that we finally tie this together with what happens when humans work together, because there are techniques that get people to do more of the wisdom of crowds and avoid herd thinking. And they should understand that that is part of what the data science story is telling us, and that there's a real danger of science going wrong, that just because we call it science or data science doesn't mean that it's blessed with something that we can all trust. That you have to be sensitized to the things that where in history, science has made mistakes. And in fact, people have hijacked it and used it for dangerous and oppressive purposes. And we need to sensitize students for that as well, if they're going to be actors in our modern world of science. So for almost every one of these mental traps that we're describing, there's a data science connection and a scientific connection. And so I think of this as teaching either a data science version of the scientific thinking curriculum or the scientific thinking version of the data science curriculum. And in both ways, I think we have a real opportunity to make a big difference at the stage while we're making this move forward. So let me just close by mentioning my own team's continuing commitment to develop these openly available teaching material to build this richer curriculum. And also just with an invitation for everyone to touch base with us if there are questions about how we can do more of this together. Perhaps I'll leave in the chat a website that has at least some of these topics on it if people are curious to see. But I really look forward to seeing what we all can do together in this richer version of a data science world.
Saul, thank you so much for that. I think your work is super inspiring. I think the work that you're doing with lots of people here and in the community has been really inspiring. I think people, I think your vision for how data science can actually be part of improving the way that we reason is like a very powerful frame. Let me just give us we've got 5 minutes before we go out into breakouts for folks who want to start to chat with each other on screen. We're going to do two quick things. One is Senator Padilla, who's been a huge champion for data science. He's been a big reason we've started to make traction on this at the federal level. Has a quick video that we're going to play, and then I'm going to have a couple of final next step items that I'll cover with everybody before we send everybody. So why don't we cue the video, and then we'll do our last items before breakouts.
Data science for everyone. Hello, data science for everyone. I'm Senator Alex Padilla, and I have the honor of representing California in the United States Senate. I'm also a proud graduate of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a degree in mechanical engineering, so I know firsthand the value of a STEM education. I want to make sure all students are literate in data science so we can keep pace with the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. Our society and our economy are increasingly grounded in data science. From weather forecasts to social media algorithms, we interact with data and data science all the time. Now, the federal government must play a role in preparing students for the jobs and challenges of the future. And that includes supporting cyber hygiene and data literacy as essential ingredients for good citizenship. It also includes investing in rigorous coursework in fields like math, biology, and computer science that open doors to STEM careers. As we prepare students for data science careers, we must build a strong and equitable pipeline of talent. Last fall, I led a group of my colleagues in urging the Institute for Education Sciences and the National Science Foundation to improve equity and access to high-quality data science education for students in kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade. I asked how Congress can better support the development and deployment of data science curriculum to reach more communities. And earlier this year, I also urged the Senate Labor, Health and Human Services Committee to fund the development of teacher training programs in the field of data science. I'm proud to partner with this coalition to advocate for our students, and I thank you for your support in all these efforts. Already, we're turning the principles of equity, inclusion, and access into action. A stronger and more diverse STEM pipeline is key to America's economic growth, our national security, and global leadership. Our students need and deserve the education to understand the data-driven world around them. Thank you.
Amazing. So let me just close with a couple of things. One is, I want to just thank all of you for the incredible work you're doing. Two is I want to thank the folks who brought this event together, the Learning Agency, the University of Chicago team. A number of them are like silent partners, haven't spoken at this event, but actually are the huge reason why this incredible amount of work is done. So I want to thank that team for all of their work. And hopefully you're inspired and learn both people that you can follow up with. I want people to, my rule is follow up the same day. Otherwise your cognitive load means you're going to forget. So like make a note. If you have a commitment idea, if you have an idea for someone else or you have someone to follow up, do it. And then finally, let me just remind people what will happen as we hit the hour, which is we want to build this as a community and as a movement. So we're going to have breakout sessions. on a set of topics, and we really encourage folks to drop in and go into those. So we've got curriculum implementation, policy, workforce readiness, and teacher training. And there'll be links in the chat for each session. And so I encourage people to click on the link for the dropout that they want to go to. If you aren't able to stick around, that's fine too, but I really encourage you to join us in this community because as you can see, it brings together a really wide range of people who care about it across a range of domains. And we're building momentum because of the hard work that you all are doing. So with that, I'll see everyone in the breakouts. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining us.